I'm Mason Marangella from Vertex Effects, and I got cloned. So what does it mean to clone? I think about it in two ways. It's either taking an expensive product and making it into a cheaper product, or taking a cheaper, well-known product and making it more boutique. So one way I can think about taking an expensive product and making it cheaper is examples like the Electro-Harmonic Soul Food doing a cheaper version of the Klon, or the TC Electronic Elma Combo being a cheaper version of a Tube Screamer, or the Deluxe Memory Man having a cheaper alternative in the Behringer Vintage Time Machine. These are all examples of sought-after pedals that are being made cheaper and more accessible. Now looking at pedals that were cheaper or ubiquitous in the marketplace or no longer existing in the marketplace that are then turned into expensive boutique pedals, we have things like the classic full tone, full drive that was originally making a really expensive boutique version of the Ibanez Tube Screamer in kind of the early days of boutique pedals. Also, currently we have the 1981 Inventions, the DVR. Overdrive pedal is kind of a really nice, expensive boutique version of a classic Rat. And lastly, we have the Vemoram ODS-1, which is a expensive, highly sought after, Japanese-made version of the Noble's ODR-1. So those are all examples of, again, cheaper pedals that are then turned into boutique pedals by some of these other boutique makers. Now in our case, it's the former. It's taking an expensive pedal and cloning it with a less expensive pedal, almost $150 difference between our pedal and the clone. Now for all intents and purposes, these from the outside look to be the same pedal, but are they really the same? Let's take a look first at the aesthetics of the pedals and how they are similar and different from each other. Well, first of all, right off the bat, you can see that they're roughly the same color, utilize the same knobs, the same font. From an outsider's perspective, if you're just somebody who didn't know these pedals at all, you would say that they're ostensibly the same. But do I have any claim to that look? As you know, we're basing our pedal off of a Dumble Steel String Singer, and we're using the look of the Dumble to inform the way that the aesthetics look. Equally, the NUX version of our pedal, the clone, is utilizing the same thing. So I don't know that I have any claim to the look of this pedal any more than NUX has a claim to the look of this pedal, because in essence we're both copying the originator with the Dumble Steel String Singer amplifier. But let's unpack some of the specifications and a little bit of the build quality. Now I'm not going to do a full autopsy of the schematic because I don't really think it's valuable. At the end of the day, it's about how the pedal sounds, and we're going to do some comparisons of that to come, so stay tuned for that. But in looking at the inside of the pedal, I see some pretty obvious difference in terms of the quality of the components, the quality of the jacks, the quality of the switches. We tend to use the highest quality stuff that we can, alpha pots, alpha 3-pole double throw foot switches, high quality European, Italian-made quarter-inch jacks that we know have a lifetime warranty. I don't see the same type of parts put into this pedal, but I think that should be expected for a pedal that's $150 less. Equally, the thickness of the board, the thickness of the traces are clearly not the same quality as what we have, but again, for $50, I think that this is about what you should expect. Now, I didn't get into measuring any of the tolerances. I don't know how close they are in terms of what we would ordinarily use. So it could be that they are in alignment with whatever we would use, but usually when you get lower tolerances, they tend to be more expensive, and when there's a wider gap in the tolerance, the parts tend to be cheaper. So I would expect that there might be a little bit wider gap, and you might experience some difference in unit to unit. If you were to buy, say, 5 or 6 of the same pedal, you might experience some sonic differences due to those tolerances. Now let's unpack a little bit of the spec differences when we look at what's actually published in the two respective manuals. Again, I'm not getting into even the schematics of this or looking at the bill of materials to see where there are similarities or differences. This is just straight what we can see right off the manual. So first off, I see there's a pretty big difference in input impedance. On the steel string that we make, we unload the input a little bit because that was a little bit more consistent with what we found when we were comparing the actual pedal to the original Dumble amplifier, that the 2.2 meg seemed to sound a little bit more like what we were expecting when we were voicing it against the real amplifier. By contrast, the NUX clone version is a 1 meg input impedance. And although in most cases I would say that this would be an ideal input impedance, there is an actual difference between the two, and it will change how the pickup loading of the guitar reacts with the pedal and with the rest of your rig. Secondly, the output impedance is actually quite different. I would say that actually the NUX is more efficient than ours is in terms of driving capacitance on the output because it has slightly lower output impedance at 10K versus ours being 100K on the output. So ours is not as efficient at driving long lines, but presumably both of these are on a pedal board. They're not having to drive a long cable back to your amplifier. So I don't know that that spec is going to make so much of a difference, but it is a difference in terms of the values that were chosen and things that are going to affect the overall tone with all things being equal. Also on these, there's a difference in terms of the voltage that they will accept. The NUX only takes 9 volts, so it does have less headroom. The steel string that we make can take up to 18 volts and it will double the headroom when you do that. But it should be said that there is a difference because ours will be able to accept higher voltage. It will have more headroom internally inside the circuit. Lastly, in terms of the current draw, there's also a difference. Ours only draws about 10 milliamps, whereas the NUX version draws 25. So either they're a little less efficient than we are at being able to design the signal path, or they have some other components in there that may not be as efficient, or it could be a result of some differences in the actual circuitry itself that causes the pedal to draw more. Also, the size of the NUX is quite a bit bigger because it has side jacks and a top jack for the 9 volts. Not only are you increasing the width left to right, but you're also increasing the height top to bottom because you have to add that DC jack, which extends it on the back, and then you have to have 2 jacks on the right and left, which expand it left and right, whereas ours are all top jacks, and it is narrower. So on a pedal board, ours is actually quite a bit smaller, but that doesn't necessarily correlate with the actual circuitry itself, but just something that I want to notate on this. Now, as I said earlier, this is not a technical autopsy of these two different pedals. Yes, I opened them both up, I compared some things, but again, I'm not looking at the schematic because ultimately what matters, especially to you as the consumer, if you want to have our pedal at a cheaper price, you care about, does it actually sound the same? So let's get into that investigation. I'm going to be comparing our steel string, and I'm going to compare 3 different versions. I'm going to compare our original, I'm going to compare the MKII, and I'm going to compare that versus the NUX version. Now, we do have another steel string in the Steel String Supreme, but that has so many different controls that are not on here, it really isn't a fair comparison. It is really holistically a completely different pedal. Even if NUX were able to accurately clone our steel string pedal, our Steel String Supreme has a whole nother circuit in it, in addition to the original steel string circuit, that this is clearly not doing. So I'm not going to add that into the mix for the purposes of this comparison. But let's get into the sound. Follow me into my office. We're going to be playing these through a deluxe reverb. I'm going to use my Strat, and I'm going to use a Loopmaster True Bypass Looper so that we can hear how each of these sound individually. So I'm here with my Roy Gallagher Custom Shop Stratocaster all passive pickups. I have in a Loopmaster True Bypass Looper 3 loops. First loop has my Vertex Steel String Clean Drive MK1. Next loop I have Vertex Steel String Clean Drive MK2. And then in the third loop I have the NUX Steel Singer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put them all at noon, every single knob at noon. I'm going to turn them on and off, give you a clean reference, and then you're going to get to hear what they do, and then I'll narrate a little bit for you for what I'm hearing. So here's the clean signal with the deluxe reverb. Clean, no gain at all. Anything that we're going to get in terms of boosting is all going to be coming from the pedals themselves. Any distortion is going to be coming from the pedals themselves. So let's bring in the very first one, the Steel String Clean Drive. Loop 2 with the Steel String MK2. Loop 3 with the NUX Steel Singer. Right off the bat, I'm hearing way more gain. I mean, let me just take you through this just to give you an example, just in real time. So here's the Steel Singer from NUX. Steel String MK2. Steel String MK1. Right away, I'm getting way more of a overdrive or distortion pedal from the NUX clone of the steel string pedals. It sounds like an overdrive, a full-blown overdrive, not really a boost type tone. I'm not saying it's a bad tone, I'm just saying that it's certainly not the same category of pedal as the steel string. What I actually hear out of it when I play it, it's kind of more of a tweed style overdrive. Let me show you kind of what I mean by that. To me, it has more of that kind of Stonesy kind of vibe, more of an Americana type vibe. I'm definitely hearing more of that from this, whereas the steel string is really more of a boost with some, just a little tiny bit of hair of it. Here's the Vertex Steel String MK2, kind of doing the same riff now. Definitely ballsier, a lot less top end. I definitely am hearing more top end on the NUX. Let's go to the version 1 of the Vertex Steel String. I would even say that even has a little bit more girth with it all at noon. And again, all of our knobs on every single one of the pedals is at noon. So we're really trying to play as apples to apples as we can in terms of tolerances, in terms of kind of where they roughly land. What I see the NUX pedal doing really well is kind of excelling more at kind of an upper mid-range emphasized overdrive. I don't know if I would necessarily call it so much dumble. Even if I'm playing kind of more Stevie Ray stuff, it still seems to sit kind of not the right way for a tube screamer. It seems to lack some of kind of the low-end presence and fatness. Let me just do that same thing with the steel string Vertex version to see what that does. To me, that just has the ballsiness, the low-end fatness, that kind of pushed, slightly compressed, but still clean while a little bit dirty. Whereas certainly when I'm playing the NUX, it's like an overdrive. Very compressed to me, kind of along the lines of how kind of a tube screamer can sound boxy. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That can work in a lot of contexts. But I just think fundamentally it is a different EQ. It is a different distortion, much more gain than the steel string, and is doing less of kind of the bigness. It's actually narrowing the tone and really, again, emphasizing that mid-range. I'm kind of hearing somewhere around maybe 1.2 or so. I think that that's kind of where it seems to focus, a little bit outside of where the Tube Screamer seems a little brighter. Of course, you could probably adjust some of this stuff out, but again, we're just trying to compare sort of as close apples to apples. If we set all these noon, where are they kind of falling in terms of the range of what these pedals are capable of. So again, not a bad sounding pedal, I don't think by any means, but fundamentally different in sound than the Steel String version 1 or the Steel String version 2. The NUX is like a different pedal. It really seems to want to be an overdrive pedal and not kind of that fattening EQ, compression, low gain sort of boost that the Steel String fundamentally is as a pedal. So you've heard what these pedals sound like in comparison, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions, even though I narrated for you some of the things that I'm hearing. Obviously, being the maker of the pedal on the other side of this clone, I'm going to have some inherent bias in that. So I do recommend that you follow your ears and listen to it for yourself and make your own judgment. But I really want to lastly talk about the ethical ramifications or any of the legal ramifications associated with cloning. As far as the circuit of the actual Steel String MK2 is concerned, or our original Steel String, it was really designed to emulate the sound of the Dumble Steel String Singer. And as many of you know who have been following our brand, know that we compared this and voiced this against an original Dumble Steel String Singer amplifier. Now this was designed to be an amplifier that was originally for slide players, pedal steel players, lap steel players, guys like David Lindley, who were famous Dumble users of the time when that amplifier first was released. And that's really what we were going for. And we found that the thing that got us closest to that sound was a MKII style design, and that through a Fender Hot Rod DeVille really got us the closest of any of the possible circuits that we tried to get that sound. And even the original owner of that amp agreed that that was the sound and got closest to what his amplifier sounded like. Now, I don't make any claim to be the originator of a MKII design circuit. There are other people that have done this preceding me. Guys like Craig Anderton, guys like Jack Orman. They came up with different types of circuits that utilized MKIIs and made them into boost and distortion circuits, and that predated anything that I did. In fact, you could even find examples of this clear back in National Semiconductor's application notes using these type of things back in the late 60s or early 70s. So this is not in any way unique to us in that regard. So if NUX is copying that, there's really nothing that I can say that is saying that I created this design. It is certainly not original to me. I don't have any claim against them in that regard. Now, the place where I may have some standing is in the court of public opinion. Now, I understand that not all of you may like our pedals, and us being cloned to you may be something that you celebrate. But the one thing I would say is that what NUX is doing in making these sorts of clones, and it's not just of me, they're making clones of Strymon, they're making clones of Marvel Effects, other boutique manufacturers, and they're trying to create a resemblance in terms of the aesthetic of these products, but not necessarily, as I heard in comparing them, delivering on the sonic elements of the pedal. They're sort of riding on the coattails of the kind of the trail that was already blazed by some of these companies, not just me. And then they're using that as an easy way to introduce a cheaper alternative into the marketplace, but not actually doing the due diligence to make the product a one-to-one clone. Now, I appreciate that not everybody is going to be able to afford a $200 Vertex pedal or a $400 Strymon pedal or fill-in-the-blank pedal that NUX is currently making at least an aesthetic replica of if not a circuit replica of. But what I would say is that in doing so, when people purchase this product and it actually isn't delivering on the tone, it's creating a false equivalency. And also what it's doing is it's having some people compare your product having only experienced the clone, which is not actually an accurate representation of your product. It's not exactly the same way as like the Electro-Harmonic Soul Food is a cheaper alternative to the Klon. In looking at this, you can see that the Soul Food is really pretty close to what the Klon is and is a cheaper version of it, but really if you follow the signal path and all the things and all the specifications, they matched it pretty much one-to-one in a cheaper alternative. I think in this case and a lot of the other cases that I see in their line, They're not one-to-one clones, but they're invoking the look of those original products and trying to create a similarity or an equivalency at a cheaper price point, which doesn't really deliver on the tone. So I'm gonna leave you with this. I wanna encourage you, if you're interested in trying this product, certainly try it. Now, if you have the ability to buy both or you wanna compare them, I highly recommend that you do it. And check me. If you think that I'm out of my mind and that this is really actually close to what it is that we're doing in the steel string, tell us in the comments. I am happy to take this feedback if you really believe that it is the same, but I think from our comparison that we did here, with all things being equal, they're fundamentally different pedals, but they look the same aesthetically. Now, I don't know the intent of NUX here. Maybe they just wanted to create something that sounded good but was a totally different thing and then just use those aesthetics. Maybe that's the case, but I wanted to do this video to give you a little context for not just what's happening to Vertex, but what's happening sort of to the global boutique community. And I suspect that this sort of thing is going to become more and more commonplace because these sorts of infringements are really unenforceable. Having NUX being based in China, even if we had all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed with trademarks and all that stuff, it's relatively unenforceable. So that's my comparison of our Vertex Steel String Clean Drive MK2 versus the NUX Steel Singer clone. Again, I'm very interested to hear what your take is on not only the sound differences, but the ethical ramifications. And as this becomes more commonplace, what are the boutique builders to do? So this is something that I think should be cause for concern for any of us that do want to support boutique pedal manufacturers, even if you're not a fan of our pedals in particular. What I'll leave you with is this. When talking about cloning, I always really think of it as the methadone for the real thing. If you want a clone, nothing is going to scratch that itch except for a clone. If you want a vintage TS808, nothing's going to scratch that itch except for a vintage TS808. We're always trying to come up with cheaper, easier ways to be able to achieve some of the tones that we hear in our head. They're never going to be quite the same. The look's never going to be quite the same. The internal components are never going to be quite the same. The PC board thickness is never going to be quite the same. There's always going to be little things, and maybe they're insignificant in terms of the tone, but psychologically, for most of us, we'll never be able to fully be satisfied unless we have the real thing. So I would encourage you, in terms of trying these things, if you are interested in the real thing, do it. Whether it's my pedal, whether it's a vintage tube screamer, whether it's a clone, whatever it may be. And if you want to try something out, relatively risk-free, low price point, to see if you even have something that's in the ballpark, and I invite you to try things like the NUX and other clones that you might find on Amazon or eBay or wherever it may be. And with that, I thank you for watching. If you like what you saw today, I recommend you like, you subscribe, you leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the content of this video and about cloning. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, I'm Mason Marangella from Vertex Effects, and today I got cloned. See ya.